The shocking revelation. The grand hall of the High Council was silent. The air was thick with tension. Glowing blue crystals lined the walls, casting eerie shadows on the smooth metallic floor. At the center of the room, Zyra stood, her hands trembling slightly. Her golden skin shimmered under the dim lights, and her deep violet eyes reflected a mix of fear and determination. Before her sat her father, High Commander Orlan, on his throne of silver and stone. His sharp features were unreadable, his piercing gaze locked onto his daughter. Zyra's mother, Elira, stood beside him, her expression softer but equally filled with concern. A dozen council members lined the hall, their expressions cold and unreadable. They were waiting. Zyra took a deep breath. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, but now that she was here, her voice felt stuck in her throat. Finally, she spoke. "Father, I have something to tell you." Orlan did not blink. "Speak." Zyra clenched her fists. "I am pregnant." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then whispers, murmurs. Some of the council members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting. Orlan's face remained like stone. Zyra forced herself to continue. "And the father is an earthling." The room erupted. Gasps, angry shouts, and disbelief filled the air. A few council members stood up, their voices sharp with outrage. "Impossible," someone shouted. "A disgrace to our bloodline," another said. Zyra stood firm, though her hands trembled. She had expected this reaction. She turned to her father, hoping for something. Understanding, even if just a little. Orlan's eyes darkened. His lips pressed into a thin line. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but deadly. "Tell me you are lying." Zyra swallowed hard. "I am not lying, Father. It is the truth." A deep silence followed. The entire hall seemed to freeze. Orlan stood slowly, his towering figure casting a long shadow over his daughter. "You have tainted your blood." His voice was filled with cold fury. "You have betrayed your own kind." Zyra flinched but did not back down. "I did not choose love, Father. It chose me." Her mother, Elira, finally spoke, her voice softer than the chaos around them. "Orlan, listen to her." But Orlan ignored his wife. He stepped closer to Zyra, his hands clenched into fists. "This human, he must be eliminated." Zyra's eyes widened. "No," she cried. Orlan's gaze was like ice. "He has no place among us. And that child, it cannot exist." Zyra felt the air leave her lungs. She had expected anger, but this. Her own father was willing to erase her child from existence. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "This baby is different. It is not just human. It is something more." Orlan shook his head. "It is an abomination." Zyra's hands curled into fists. "No, you are afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of what you do not understand." The council members whispered among themselves. Some looked uncertain. Others looked furious. Orlan raised his hand, and the room fell silent. His voice was final, unshaken. "The human will be executed. And you, my daughter, you will be locked away until this mistake is corrected." Zyra's breath hitched. "You would do this to your own blood." Orlan did not answer. She took a step back. Her mind raced. She needed to get out of here. She needed to warn Ethan. Her mother took a step forward, whispering urgently, "Zyra, run. Now." Zyra hesitated for only a second. Then, without another word, she turned and bolted out of the hall. Guards shouted behind her, but she did not stop. Her heart pounded as she raced through the corridors of the palace. She had to reach Ethan before it was too late. She had to save him. And she had to save their child. A father's wrath, and a deadly decision. Zyra's heart pounded as she ran through the cold metallic corridors of the palace. The echo of her footsteps bounced off the walls, But behind her, she could already hear the guards in pursuit. Their armored boots struck the ground in unison, their voices sharp as they barked orders to capture her. Her mind raced. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. Ethan was in danger, and if she didn't reach him soon, her father's execution order would be carried out. She turned sharply into a narrow hallway, her golden skin glowing faintly under the bioluminescent lights that lined the walls. Her breath was ragged, but she couldn't afford to stop. The weight of her father's words still pressed against her chest. The human will be executed. The child cannot exist. Those words weren't just a command. They were a death sentence. Zyra's mother, Elira, had given her the only warning she would get. She had to move fast. She reached the docking bay, but before she could enter, the heavy metal doors slammed shut in front of her. A force field activated with a sharp hum, blocking her way. "Stop, Zyra!" A deep voice boomed behind her. She turned, chest heaving, as High Commander Orlan stepped forward. His towering figure radiated power, his expression a mask of cold fury. Behind him, 6 heavily armed guards stood ready, their weapons humming with energy. "You will not leave," Orlan said, his voice firm. "You have shamed our bloodline. You have sided with a creature unworthy of our kind. And now you think you can defy me." Zyra's fists clenched. "I am not defying you, Father. I am choosing love. I am choosing my child." Her father's expression darkened. "Love is a weakness, Zyra, and your child is not a blessing. It is a threat. Our ancestors built an empire through strength, through purity. That creature you call a father to your child will pollute our legacy." Zyra shook her head, stepping back. "You are wrong." Orlan sighed, almost disappointed. "I had hoped you would see reason. But I will not allow your foolishness to endanger us all." He raised his hand, and the guards advanced. "Take her to the confinement chambers. The human will be executed at sunrise." The desperate plea. Zyra's stomach twisted with fear, but she did not let it show. She had to think. She had to stall. "Father, please," she said, her voice desperate. "Just listen to me. This child is not a threat. It is a miracle." Orlan did not respond. "There is something different about this baby," she continued. "I can feel it. The energy inside me, inside them. It is unlike anything our people have known." Orlan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Doubt. Curiosity. Zyra pushed forward. "You always spoke of the prophecies, the ancient texts that spoke of a child who would change the stars. What if my baby is the one?" For the first time, Orlan hesitated. The prophecies were sacred. They spoke of a time when a being of 2 worlds would bring either salvation or destruction. But could this truly be it? The doubt vanished from his face. He hardened his expression. "Even if it were true, the risk is too great." Zyra's heart sank. There was no changing his mind. She took 1 step back, then another. The guards moved in. She had no choice. The escape, with a sudden burst of energy, Zyra lifted her hands and unleashed a shockwave of golden light. The force threw the guards backward, their weapons scattering across the floor. The docking bay's lights flickered as the energy rippled through the air. Orlan staggered back, his expression momentarily stunned. Zyra didn't wait. She turned and sprinted toward the emergency exit on the far wall. She slammed her palm against the control panel, overriding the security lock. The doors hissed open. "Seal the exits," Orlan roared. Alarms blared, red lights flashing in the corridors. But Zyra was already moving. She dodged past incoming guards, sliding under a descending barrier just in time. Her pulse raced as she activated her communicator. "Ethan, wake up." She gasped into the device. "They're coming for you. You need to get out. Now." Static. Then a groggy voice. "Zyra, what's going on?" "No time to explain. Meet me at the south loading docks. Now." She didn't wait for his response. The corridors stretched ahead of her like a maze, but she knew every passage, every hidden exit. She had trained for war, but now she was fighting her own people for the life of the man she loved. Her unborn child stirred inside her, as if sensing the danger. She whispered, "I will protect you, no matter what." Ethan's capture. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the Citadel, Ethan sat in a cold, high-tech cell. His human body felt out of place in the strange environment. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, a constant reminder that he was surrounded by forces beyond his understanding. He had never imagined this, falling in love with an alien princess, getting captured by her terrifying father, and now finding out that he was going to be a father himself. His head was still spinning from Zyra's words when the doors to his cell slid open. A group of armed guards entered. Their leader, a tall, armored figure, stepped forward. "The High Commander has ordered your execution." Ethan's heart pounded. "Move." But just as the guards reached for him, a loud explosion shook the entire facility. The walls trembled. Sparks rained from the ceiling. A familiar voice crackled through his communicator. "Ethan, run. The chase begins." Zyra had done it. She had reached the security grid and triggered the overload. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, knocking the nearest guard off balance. He grabbed a fallen weapon and sprinted down the hall. The guards recovered quickly, raising their weapons. Zyra's voice guided him through the chaos. "Take the left corridor. I'm almost there." The chase had begun. Zyra and Ethan had one chance to escape. But Orlan was not a man who allowed traitors to run. He would hunt them, and if they were caught, there would be no mercy. The Great Escape. The sirens screamed across the high citadel, a relentless wail of war and betrayal. The metallic corridors flashed with red warning lights as Zyra sprinted forward, her breath ragged, her muscles burning with exhaustion. Every fiber of her being was focused on one thing: saving Ethan. Ethan was running too, his human legs struggling to keep pace in a place where gravity pulled just a little differently. His head was still spinning from the shock of his capture, the impossible revelations, and now, the fight for his life. He gripped the stolen energy weapon tightly, but he knew it was useless against the sheer numbers coming after them. Left. Zyra's voice crackled through the communicator in his ear. He pivoted sharply, sliding past a row of glowing containment cells where strange, unidentified creatures were locked away. Some of them pressed against the glass, watching his escape with curious, glowing eyes. Behind him, the heavy boots of the guards thundered against the floor. They were closing in. A plasma blast whizzed past his head, searing a hole into the wall beside him. Ethan swore under his breath. "Zyra, where the hell are you?" "Almost there." Orlan's relentless hunt. Meanwhile, High Commander Orlan stood in the Citadel's command center, watching everything unfold through the security feeds. His jaw was set, his hands clenched behind his back. His daughter's betrayal burned like acid in his veins. "They are heading for the south loading docks," one of his officers reported. Orlan's eyes narrowed. "Seal all exit points. Deploy the hunters." The officer hesitated. "Sir, if we send the hunters, there will be no survivors." Orlan's voice was cold as steel. "I am aware." Zyra and Ethan reunite. Zyra burst into the final corridor just in time to see Ethan dodging another barrage of plasma fire. "Ethan," she shouted. He turned at the sound of her voice, relief flashing across his face, before it was replaced by urgency. Zyra raised her hands and unleashed a wave of golden energy, slamming the pursuing guards against the walls with a concussive blast. Ethan didn't waste time staring. "You gotta teach me how to do that," he muttered as he sprinted toward her. Zyra grabbed his hand. "No time. We have to go." The doors to the south loading docks were just ahead, but before they could reach them, the walls on either side of them shifted. From hidden compartments, the hunters emerged. Tall, skeletal figures cloaked in obsidian armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. They moved without sound, their limbs unnaturally long, their hands tipped with razor-sharp talons. Ethan instinctively raised his stolen weapon. What the hell are those? Zara's face paled. Elite assassins. My father doesn't want us captured. He wants us erased. The lead hunter tilted its head slightly. Then, without a word, it lunged. A fight for survival. Zara shoved Ethan out of the way as the hunter's claws splashed through the air, cutting through the steel wall like it was paper. Sparks flew, the impact shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan rolled and fired, but the hunter moved too fast. It twisted its body unnaturally, dodging the plasma bolts with ease. "Your guns won't work," Zara shouted. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Great, fantastic. Love this for us." Another hunter launched itself at Zara, claws extended. She countered with a blast of energy, but it absorbed the hit, barely slowing down. They were outmatched. They had to get to the ship. Zara grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him toward the docking bay doors. "Cover me." Ethan turned, firing wildly to slow down their attackers. It wasn't perfect, but it gave Zara just enough time to override the docking bay's security system. The doors hissed open, revealing the stolen starship she had prepared. "Get in," she screamed. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted up the ramp, Zara right behind him. The hunters were only steps away. Zara slammed her palm against the control panel, and the ramp began closing. One of the hunters leaped, but the ramp shut just in time, severing its arm in the process. The ship's alarms blared as the engines roared to life. Breaking free, Zara jumped into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. "Hang on." The ship lifted off just as the entire docking bay exploded with gunfire. Orlan's forces had arrived, firing everything they had. Ethan barely strapped himself in before the ship jerked violently, dodging the incoming attacks. The hangar doors loomed ahead, still sealed shut. "Zara," Ethan said, panic rising. "That door is still closed." Zara narrowed her eyes. Not for long. She slammed a lever forward, and the ship's front cannons fired, blowing a hole through the sealed doors. The vacuum of space ripped through the hangar, pulling debris, guards, and even some unlucky hunters into the void. Their ship shot forward, pushing through the chaos. And then, they were free. Orlan's vow. Back in the Citadel, Orlan watched his daughter escape. His expression remained unreadable. A council member turned to him. "Shall we pursue?" Orlan didn't answer immediately. He simply stared at the shattered remains of the hangar doors, his hands tightening into fists. Finally, he spoke. "No need." He turned away, his voice colder than the void outside. "They will not get far." A moment of peace. In the ship, Ethan was still catching his breath. Okay. So that was officially the craziest thing I have ever been through." He turned to Zara. "Do I at least get a thank you for not dying?" Zara let out a breathless laugh. "Thank you, Ethan." He smirked. "That's all I wanted." Then his expression softened as he looked at her. "Are you okay?" Zara hesitated. Then she placed a hand on her stomach. Her child was still safe. For now. But her father would not stop. This was just the beginning. Hunted across the galaxy. The stolen starship tore through the darkness of space, its engines burning bright against the vast, endless void. Stars stretched into thin lines as the ship jumped into hyperspace, escaping the gravitational pull of Zara's homeworld. Inside the cockpit, red warning lights flashed on the control panels. Damage reports flooded the screen. The ship had barely survived the escape. Zara exhaled sharply, hands still gripping the controls. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her heart pounding as if trying to break free from her chest. She had done it. She had escaped. For now. Ethan unbuckled himself from the co-pilot's seat and let out a breathless laugh. "Well, that was fun. We should do that again sometime. Maybe next time, with fewer people trying to kill us." Zara shot him a look, but a small smile tugged at her lips. He stretched his arms. "So what's the plan now?" Because I don't think your dad is just going to let us go. Her smile faded. He was right. High Commander Orlan was not a man who allowed traitors to walk away. Zira pulled up the ship's long-range scanners. We need a safe place to land, somewhere we can lay low. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. We're not safe yet, Ethan. My father won't stop. He will track us. Ethan frowned. How? We just jumped into hyperspace. We could be anywhere. Zira hesitated. He knows me. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. He knows exactly where I would go. Ethan crossed his arms. Well, then we go somewhere unexpected. Zira considered his words. There was one place that no one, not even her father, would expect her to go. It was a place of ruins and secrets, a place forbidden by her people for centuries. The ancient planet of Valoria. The pursuit begins. Meanwhile, aboard the Royal Fleet command ship, High Commander Orlan stood before a massive holographic display. The map showed countless star systems, but his eyes were focused on only one thing, the small blinking red dot that indicated Zira's last known location. A deep voice interrupted his thoughts. Shall we send the hunters, Commander? Orlan's piercing gaze flicked to his chief strategist, General Kale. Not yet, Orlan said coolly. Zira is no fool. She will know we are following. We must predict where she will go. Kale tilted his head. She could go anywhere. There are thousands of systems beyond this sector. Orlan narrowed his eyes. No, there is only one place she would run to. He turned to the fleet's lead tracker, a creature with pale blue skin and eyes that shimmered like liquid silver. The beam placed its hands over the control panel, and strange symbols appeared across the hologram. Moments later, its voice echoed through the chamber. Valoria. Kale furrowed his brow. That world is nothing but ruins. It was abandoned long ago. Orlan's expression remained unreadable. It was not abandoned. It was buried. Kale hesitated. Should we proceed, Commander? Orlan's voice was like ice. Prepare the fleet. We leave immediately. Landing on Valoria, Zira and Ethan's ship broke out of hyperspace near the planet's orbit. The world below them was a vast, crimson desert stretching for miles, broken only by the jagged remains of ancient structures. Towers that had collapsed, bridges that led to nowhere, and colossal stone statues that had been weathered by time. Ethan leaned forward, peering at the view through the ship's main window. This place looks dead. Zira nodded. It has been for a long time. Ethan frowned. So, why are we here? Zira input landing coordinates and steered the ship toward the surface. Because my people fear this place, which means it's the one place my father won't follow us blindly. As the ship touched down, dust and debris swirled around them. The engines powered down, leaving only silence. Ethan unbuckled himself and stretched. All right. So what's the plan? Do we just hide here? Zira hesitated. No, we're here to find answers. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Answers. Zira stood, placing a hand on her stomach. About our child. About why my father is so afraid. She turned toward the airlock and pressed the controls. The doors hissed open, revealing the ruins stretching before them. And something else. Something watching them. Secrets of the ancients. The ruins of Valoria were vast, ancient structures covered in alien glyphs that glowed faintly under the dim red sky. The wind howled through the broken pillars, creating an eerie atmosphere. Ethan stuck close to Zira. Are you sure no one else is here? Zira scanned the area. There shouldn't be. But as they moved deeper into the ruins, Zira felt a strange energy. It was familiar yet different. They reached what looked like an ancient temple, its entrance blocked by massive stone doors. Zira hesitated before placing her hand against the surface. Immediately, the symbols lit up, and the doors began to open. Ethan took a step back. I have a bad feeling about this. Inside the temple, a holographic figure appeared. It was an ancient version of Zura's people. Its voice echoed in a long-forgotten language before translating itself. "Welcome, child of two worlds. You have come seeking the truth." Zura and Ethan exchanged glances. The figure continued. "Your unborn child is the key. It carries the power to awaken what has been hidden for millennia." Zura's breath caught in her throat. "Awaken what?" The figure's glowing eyes flickered. "The truth of your origins, and the war that was never meant to end." Before Zura could ask another question, a deafening explosion rocked the temple. Dust and debris rained down. Then, a voice boomed through the ruins. "I told you, you would not get far." Zura and Ethan turned toward the entrance, where High Commander Orlan stood, flanked by an entire army. Blasters hummed. Ships hovered above, ready to strike. Orlan's gaze was locked on his daughter. "Come home, Zura. This is your last chance." Zura's heart pounded. There was no escape now. She had found the answers she was looking for. But at what cost? The hidden truth. The ruins of Valoria trembled under the weight of warships hovering above. The crimson sky darkened as the royal fleet surrounded the ancient temple, cutting off every possible escape route. Zura and Ethan stood at the temple entrance, staring down at the unstoppable force that had come for them. High Commander Orlan stood at the front, his obsidian battle armor gleaming under the dim light. His presence alone was suffocating, radiating power and authority. Behind him, hundreds of elite soldiers aimed their weapons, ready to fire at a single command. The wind howled through the ruins as Orlan's voice cut through the silence. "This is your last chance, Zura. Surrender now, and I will spare the human." Zura's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. "Do not believe him," Ethan whispered. "He will kill us both the moment we surrender." Zura already knew that. She turned to face her father, her violet eyes burning with defiance. "You have already made it clear, Father. My child is an abomination to you. Do you expect me to trust you now?" Orlan's face remained unreadable. "This is not about trust, Zura. This is about survival. You have no idea what you are carrying inside you. That child is a threat to everything we have built." Zura's hands curled into fists. "You are wrong." Orlan shook his head, his voice cold. "Am I? Then tell me, why do the Ancient Ones speak of its coming? Why did they warn us?" Zura hesitated. She didn't have an answer. The prophecy revealed. The holographic figure inside the temple still flickered, ancient energy radiating from its form. Its glowing eyes turned toward Zura. "You seek the truth, child of two worlds. And now you shall have it." The temple trembled as more symbols illuminated across the walls. A projection of a planet-sized war emerged before them. Long ago, before the stars were divided, our kind was not alone. The image showed two species, one resembling Zura's people, the other distinctly human. Ethan's breath caught. "Wait, are those?" The hologram continued. "Our ancestors and the humans were once one civilization, one empire that ruled the galaxies together. But then, the child was born." The image shifted to reveal a radiant being, a child glowing with celestial energy, a being of two worlds, possessing power beyond imagination. It was seen as a savior by some, and a destroyer by others. The projection exploded into images of war, fire, destruction, entire planets consumed by energy storms. Those who feared the child sought to erase its existence, and in doing so, shattered the unity between the two races. The Great War began, and history was rewritten to hide the truth. The image faded, and the temple fell silent. Zura placed a hand on her stomach. The realization hit her like a shockwave. Her child was not just unique. It was the rebirth of something ancient, something powerful. Ethan swallowed hard. "So let me get this straight. Your people and mine used to be allies, but because of some cosmic super baby, they wiped out all evidence and started a war." The holographic figure nodded. "And now, history repeats itself." Zura turned to face her father. This is what you were afraid of, isn't it? You knew the prophecy. You knew my child could change everything. Orlan's expression hardened. Your child will destroy everything we have built. The ancients themselves feared it. No, Zyra shot back. They feared their own ignorance. They feared what they could not control. Ethan exhaled sharply. Okay, I know this is a deep family argument, but maybe we should focus on the part where we're still surrounded by an army. Orlan's eyes gleamed. It is already too late. He raised his hand. Kill the human. Take my daughter alive. The battle for the future. The moment Orlan's hand dropped, chaos erupted. Hundreds of soldiers opened fire at once, their energy weapons releasing streaks of burning plasma. Zyra reacted instinctively. She raised her arms, and a massive energy shield burst from her body, deflecting the blasts in every direction. Ethan dove behind a fallen pillar, gripping his weapon. Well, I guess we're doing this the hard way. The soldiers advanced, closing in from all sides. Zyra turned to Ethan. Get inside the temple. There has to be something we can use. What about you? He shouted. She met his gaze. I'll hold them off. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Don't die. He sprinted into the temple, disappearing into the darkness. Father versus daughter. Orlan stepped forward, his cape billowing as he unsheathed his plasma blade, a weapon only wielded by the highest warriors of the Empire. Zyra clenched her fists, golden energy swirling around her hands. You cannot win, Zyra, Orlan said, his voice calm but deadly. I trained you myself. Zyra's eyes burned with defiance. Then you should know I never fight to lose. She launched herself forward. Their battle was a clash of titans, each strike sending shockwaves through the ruins. Orlan's blade cut through the air with deadly precision, but Zyra countered with bursts of raw energy, forcing him back. The ground beneath them cracked from the sheer force of their attacks. For the first time, Orlan struggled. Ethan's discovery. Deep within the temple, Ethan ran past ancient machinery and glowing artifacts. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that they needed something to turn the tide. Then he saw it. At the center of the temple, resting on a floating platform, was a device pulsing with raw energy. It was the core of the ancients, the power that had once united both races. Ethan reached for it just as the walls trembled again. A voice echoed inside his mind. Will you take the risk, human? Ethan hesitated for only a second. Screw it. Let's see what this does. He grabbed the core. The moment his fingers touched it, light exploded from the temple. A new awakening. Outside, the battle froze. Orlan stepped back as a pillar of energy erupted from the temple. His soldiers staggered, their weapons flickering. Zyra turned toward the blinding light. And from within it, Ethan emerged. But he was no longer just Ethan. His eyes burned with celestial power, and his body radiated an energy that shook the ruins themselves. Orlan's face paled. Impossible. Ethan looked down at himself, feeling the power surging through him. He grinned. Okay, this is new. Zyra's heart pounded. The prophecy was never about destruction. It was about rebirth. And now, the war for the future had truly begun. The final confrontation. A deafening silence hung over the ruins of Valoria. The battlefield, once roaring with the sound of plasma fire and clashing weapons, now stood still. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the ground itself seemed to tremble under the weight of something ancient awakening. All eyes were on Ethan. Orlan took a cautious step back, his expression unreadable, but for the first time in his life, there was uncertainty in his eyes. Ethan stood at the center of it all, his body radiating celestial energy. His skin flickered with shifting patterns of gold and violet, as if the power inside him was still adjusting to his form. His eyes glowed with a brilliance that was almost impossible to look at directly. He turned his gaze to Zyra, and for a moment, despite the chaos, despite the war raging around them, There was a deep, unspoken understanding between them. He was different now. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was destiny, a battle of gods and mortals. Orlan's hesitation lasted only a moment before his warrior instincts took over. He gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on his plasma blade. "Seize them," he commanded. His soldiers sprang back into action, but Ethan simply raised a hand. The air vibrated, and suddenly, a shockwave of pure energy erupted from his body. The nearest soldiers were lifted off their feet and thrown backward like ragdolls. Their weapons short-circuited, their armor cracked under the immense force. Zira gasped. "Ethan, what are you?" He turned to her, his voice not just his own, but layered with something ancient. "I see it now. I understand what they tried to hide." Zira's breath caught. "What do you see?" Ethan lifted his hand again, and the ruins of the temple responded. The ancient symbols along the walls lit up, the stones shifting and rearranging themselves like a puzzle unlocking after centuries of being dormant. "The truth," he whispered. "It was never about destruction. It was about control. They feared what we could become." Orlan's eyes darkened. "You are meddling with forces beyond your understanding, human." Ethan's gaze met his. "Then let's test that theory." And then everything exploded into chaos. Orlan's last stand. Orlan charged forward, moving faster than any normal being should. His plasma blade hummed with lethal energy as he struck. But Ethan caught it with his bare hand. Orlan's eyes widened in disbelief as Ethan held the weapon mid-strike, unharmed. The blade, designed to cut through the strongest alloys, flickered against his palm but could not pierce his skin. Ethan's expression was unreadable. "Your weapons won't work on me anymore." Then, with a flick of his wrist, he shattered the plasma blade into pieces. Orlan staggered back, and for the first time in his life, fear entered his eyes. But the High Commander was no coward. He raised his hands, summoning all this power, and unleashed a storm of raw energy. Zira barely had time to react before Ethan stepped in front of her, absorbing the attack like it was nothing. Then he returned it. The force of it sent Orlan crashing through the remains of a stone pillar, debris raining down around him. He struggled to rise, his body shaking from the sheer impact. But it was over. The High Commander of the Galactic Empire, defeated. The choice. The soldiers stood frozen, weapons lowered. Without their leader, they were directionless. Ethan stepped forward, standing over Orlan, his glowing eyes locked onto the man who had wanted him dead. Zira watched, holding her breath. This was the moment. Would Ethan strike him down? Would he end the cycle of violence right here? For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Ethan did something no one expected. He extended his hand. Orlan looked up, blood trailing down his lip, his pride shattered. "I am not your enemy," Ethan said, "but you need to stop being mine." Silence. Then, Orlan closed his eyes. His entire body sagged. The war was over. He reached out, grasping Ethan's forearm. A silent acceptance. The new beginning. The surviving soldiers lowered their weapons completely. The battle was over. Zira let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She stepped forward, taking Ethan's hand. His glow had dimmed slightly, his body adjusting to the overwhelming power coursing through him. She looked into his eyes. "What happens now?" Ethan smiled softly. "Now, we make sure this never happens again." He turned toward the remaining forces. "Your war is over. The past does not need to repeat itself." The soldiers exchanged glances. Some looked uncertain. Others seemed relieved. Orlan, still kneeling, finally spoke. "You would let me live, even after all I have done." Ethan nodded. "Because that's the difference between you and me." Orlan let out a hollow laugh. "You are a fool, human." Ethan smirked. "Maybe. But I'm a fool who just kicked your ass." Zira elbowed him. "Ethan." He shrugged. "What?" "It's true. A child of two worlds. As the dust settled, Zyra placed her hands on her stomach. The child inside her stirred, and for the first time, she felt at peace. Their child would not be hunted. Their child would be a bridge. A symbol that two worlds, once torn apart by fear, could stand together once more. The future had changed. The war that had once been prophesied would not happen, because they had chosen a different path. Zyra turned to Ethan, her heart full of something new. Hope. She smiled. Let's go home. A new beginning. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same again. The ruins of Valoria stood in eerie silence, the weight of ancient history pressing down on the survivors. Soldiers from Orlan's fleet lowered their weapons, their faces a mix of uncertainty and disbelief. No one had expected this. Not Orlan, not Zyra, not even Ethan, who was still adjusting to the immense power coursing through his body. The war that had been destined, prophesied, and feared for generations had ended, not with destruction, but with understanding. A broken empire. Orlan knelt on the shattered ground, his once mighty presence diminished. His armor was cracked, his pride even more so. He had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of his kind, in the purity of their race. And now he had been forced to face a truth even he could not deny. The past had been a lie. His fear had been misplaced. He looked up at Ethan, who stood before him, not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. A bridge between two worlds. Ethan took a deep breath, his glowing eyes flickering as the power within him stabilized. He could feel it, the echoes of the ancient ones, the knowledge of a lost civilization. He understood now. Their war had never been necessary. The fate of Orlan. The silence stretched as Ethan looked down at Orlan. This was his moment. The old warrior had been beaten, humiliated. Ethan could end it here. One move, and he could erase the threat Orlan had posed. But that wasn't who he was. Zyra stepped beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "What will you do?" Ethan studied Orlan, then let out a slow breath. "I'm not going to kill him." Murmurs spread through the remaining soldiers. Orlan clenched his fists. "You should. If you let me live, I may one day rise against you again." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, but I kicked your ass once. I can do it again." Zyra sighed. "Ethan." He held up his hands. Okay. Listen, Orlan. This is your chance. You can keep clinging to the past, or you can step aside and let your people move forward." The High Commander was silent for a long time. Then he turned to his soldiers. They were waiting for his command. And for the first time, Orlan had no orders to give. He looked at Zyra, his daughter, the child he had once sought to imprison, to control. Now she stood tall, powerful, unafraid. His jaw tightened. "You are the future now." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward his remaining fleet. His soldiers hesitated, then followed. Ethan blinked. "Wait, is that it? Just like that?" Zyra exhaled. "He's surrendering. In his own way." Ethan watched as Orlan's warships powered up. One by one, they lifted off, vanishing into the sky. And then, for the first time in a long time, there was peace. The aftermath. Ethan leaned against a fallen pillar, rubbing the back of his neck. What now?" Zyra looked up at the sky, where the last remnants of the royal fleet had disappeared. "Now, we rebuild." Ethan chuckled. "That sounds exhausting. Can't we just take a break first?" She smiled. "Not this time." She placed a hand on her stomach, and Ethan's eyes softened. This child, their child, would be something new. Not just an heir to an empire, but a symbol of a new era, a bridge between species, a force greater than either side had ever known. Zyra turned to Ethan, her violet eyes glowing with something fierce, something unstoppable. "Hope. We have a galaxy to change." Ethan grinned. No pressure, right? The legacy begins. Months passed. The remnants of the war faded into history. The old empire, Orlan's rule, began to crumble. Without war, without an enemy, its people were forced to evolve. Some resisted. Some still clung to the past. But the future had already been decided. In the heart of the galaxy, a new alliance was born, one that welcomed humans and Xyrus people as equals, one that promised a future of unity instead of division. And at its center, guiding them, were two people who had once been hunted, Ethan, Zura, and the child who would change everything. A final look to the stars. Ethan stood on the bridge of their new flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. So much had changed. He felt Zara step beside him, her fingers intertwining with his. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Anywhere we want." She laughed. "Then let's go." And together, they stepped forward into the unknown. Because this was just the beginning.